Everyone, welcome to Tim and Tim Talks Tech. My name is Tim Myers. With me, I have Tim Hudson as always. Welcome to episode 3. So in this episode, we're going to do something that's going to try to bring it all home. In the last couple of weeks, we've talked about Veeam Backup for Office 365 version 4 specifically. We've highlighted some of the differences and kind of the what's new features. In episode 2, if you missed it, Mr. Hudson here kind of stepped through the interface and gave you kind of a bird's eye view of some of the new features. So what we wanted to do today is really try to tie it all in together. And so we've put together this scenario, and we're going to show you a couple of different ways as we kind of step through this scenario today. So the scenario is going to be, you've got a user at your organization, and that user is leaving the company. And before they leave, they've decided to take all the email and delete it from their specific mailbox. There's some sensitive information in there, and as the exchange administrator, you're kind of tasked with being able to recover and restore that deleted information. And so the two ways that would happen, depending on the arrangement that you as a tenant may have with your VCSP, could be A, you contact the service provider, you explain to them what's happened, you give them the information related to the user in the mailbox, and you ask them to perform the restore for you, right? And so the first episode or the first scenario here that we'll look at is what that restore looks like from the service provider point of view. And then the second example would be, well, maybe the service that's being offered to you through the service provider gives you the ability to do your own self-service restore. And so that second example will be, how do I restore that mail back into the mailbox, but really from the tenant perspective. So Tim, let's go ahead and start with that service provider perspective. Obviously, we've got a scenario mocked up here. Why don't you go ahead and kind of step us through that? I think where we'll start here is with the user logged into their mailbox and actually deleting all of the email, right? Take us through that.
Yeah. Let's start there, Tim, for the actual scenario. But when I want to make sure the audience understands that we've already set this stuff up. We reviewed last week that in this install we're talking about, or in this implementation, we've added a number of organizations here. We're going to look at this organization today that ends in 918. These are all demo orgs from demos.microsoft.com. And I just wanted to point out, Tim, that we've already added this organization, and we've already created jobs, and we've already successfully backed up items. So wanted to make sure the audience understood that walking through the scenario, we already would have had to have a setup, right? So if this is our setup.
From a steps perspective, to your point, Tim, right? I mean, the environment's set up, the organization's been added, the repositories are created. There's no how to, from this particular episode, from a setup and configuration perspective, right? This is really starting from the perspective that as the administrator, somebody needs to go in and be able to recover this data, right? So prerequisites have been met, installation and configuration has been performed, backups have occurred, right?
Yep. Yeah, so here's our user. I've logged in as Megan B or Megan Bowen. You can see over here in the top right, I know I'm selecting the correct organization ending in 918. I've logged in as this user. There are hypothetical employee that's leaving, and whether malicious or not, they're going to decide to delete all their emails. So I'm logged into Outlook here. You can see in my inbox over here on the left, hopefully, that I've got about 67 unread emails. So maybe 68, 69, give or take. You can see I've got a couple of red items here, and I'm just going to scroll all the way down. And I'm just going to select these and delete them. And it says, hey, do you want to delete these 41 conversations? Of course. And I'm not sure how well the screen share will take it for the audience, but you can see here these the number of emails going down. And as I click off and click back on, eventually we're going to get to hopefully a low number or 0. All right, so this is our assumption that the users come here and remove their email. I've made this mistake. So walk me through the next step, and I'll guide us on the screen share.
Okay. So now that we have deleted the emails, the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to switch over to the actual Veeam backup for Office 365, right, console here. And over on the left, we're going to specifically highlight that 918 organization, right, because that's where the emails lie. And so from this step, we're going to go actually and see that we've got jobs that have been created and successful. We can see the last backup was done on the 14th at 6:21 p.m., right? Mm-hmm. And therefore, now we need to go and explore our backups, right? This is how we get to the integration of the Veeam Explorers. And we're going to go to the latest Exchange state, which would be the most recent backup. So if you click on that for me, Tim.
Yeah, just ultimate confirmation here. You know, what you were referring to, you saw the last backup date here for these jobs. And of course, when I click Explore, I'm going to get just a reference, just making totally sure I'm looking at that restore point from yesterday. And so that phone call's been made, right? The user or the organization has called and said, I need my data. Okay, so as the service provider, like you said, Tim, I'm going to take care of this end customer. I've opened the Explorer for Exchange. Of course, I'm going to drill into this particular organization, and I'm going to find our Megan B. And as I open the tree for Megan B, I'm going to come to their inbox, because we already know through the scenario we set up that this is the data that's been deleted. Okay, if it were something else, we would go to the appropriate location. So I'm going to, because I assume that the users deleted all of their messages or the entirety of their inbox, I guess I really have two ways to restore. I could select multiple messages and right-click and restore them. You can see I've got this option here to restore to this inbox. Or on the left side, I can click the inbox itself and just pick to restore the entire inbox, which is what I'm going to do in this scenario. So we talked in episode 2 about having set up this modern auth piece. And it's interesting here that when we go to do the restore, we immediately need essentially authentication approval. First, we're going to verify what method is VBO going to use to talk to Office 365. And I'll just pick the existing Azure AD app that was created when we started the organization or added the organization. And this is really new and interesting here. This method of authenticating in order to perform this action. And so, Tim, we in episode 2, when we added organizations, we had a similar prompt.
Looked very familiar, yes, sir.
Yeah. So here I'm the provider, and I've got to authenticate here in order to restore this inbox. We're not going to do it for this example, Tim. I want to perform the actual restore in a self-service, a tenant self-service scenario. But this is if the service provider were to navigate to Microsoft.com/device login, which we'll show in a moment from the tenant perspective, we'll be asked to provide this code, copy the code, we drop it in. We'll then be asked to authenticate just to verify that the user that's provided for authentication also has permissions for that Office 365 org, because we really want to make sure that the user initiating the restore has the right creds. Is there anything interesting you see here about the way that we've asked the provider to authenticate again? I mean, do you think, Tim, that it's weird that, we're already doing these backups. We don't have to authenticate to backup every night. What are your thoughts around asking to authenticate for a restore?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. I mean, I think if we look back to prior versions of VBO, there was always this need to be able to provide an administrative account to the service provider, right? From the perspective of giving them the authority and administrative privileges to be able to do these types of restores, right? And so now what we've done is we've kind of progressed into version 4 and really taking advantage of the whole modern authentication in Office 365. We've kind of removed that need now, right? In being able to do kind of this one-off, just-in-time authentication necessary for whatever the action is. So it's really kind of wrapping a tighter realm of security around the protection of the tenant infrastructure and backup data, right? And not exposing any type of a security risk by providing a set of credentials that are non-expiring, et cetera, right, to the service provider.
Yes, yeah, non-expiring with administrative permissions, right?
East of the kingdom.
Yeah, so in order to perform the rest of our example, I flipped over to the tenant side. And let's talk a minute about tenant self-service. So we want to show the same example of restoring that inbox, but the tenant performing that action themselves. They're working with the service provider. Service provider is responsible for running these backups. Okay, and now I'm the tenant, and we just had the scenario we've gone over occur. So what's required from the tenant side is this. Today, the tenant will need an install of VBR. You can see at the top that I'm using Community Edition. From a licensing perspective, we're super flexible. If they're already a Veeam customer, stuff just works. They leverage their existing Veeam install to perform this self-service restore. If they're not an existing Veeam customer, they may need Community Edition. A couple gigs, simple install, no license required. But a couple of setup steps here, Tim. Got to add a service provider. This is our endpoint. We're going to leverage the Cloud Connect framework to interrogate that service provider's install, look at our restore points, be able to navigate through that. So we're going to connect to our service provider through VBR here. You can see I have a very simple username. Easy setup from the service provider side, I guess. I'll leave it at that. So let's perform this tenant restore. I've added my service provider already. I have no Cloud Connect backup. I have no Cloud Connect replication. It's simply a empty, username. Authentication principle, perhaps. I've opened my Explorer for Exchange. I'm going to come to Add Mailbox Store. And since I have added that service provider in VBR, I have a third option here, which is a provider.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. Even if you had multiple providers, you would be able to select from different ones. Perhaps you have a different Cloud Connect backup provider than you do O365, or perhaps you have a provider that provides managed services to you through VBR. You might have multiple folks in your service provider list. Just hit your drop down here. They would be displayed. We have our authentication mechanism to choose here now that we're in 4C, and we can do full modern auth type of integration. I'll leave this selected. This was what we chose over on our provider side. And I know that I am going to use my default Azure region. Same authentication prompt though. So what I'm going to do, Tim, is I'm going to change my screen share, flip to Microsoft.com/device login. And we're going to see our code. Right? So as the tenant, I come here, I hit copy code. I know you can't see this, but I'm going to paste this code in and hit next. And the next thing we get is verification. I'm picking the right Megan B. So I'm going to pick my organization ending in 918. And since I was already signed in and had selected to save my sign-in, we've completed the appropriate authentication. If I had not been signed in, Tim, it would ask me for my username and password, and I would provide those. I'll flip back to my VBO. And what you see here at the bottom is our expected green check. We've authenticated, verified. I'm going to hit connect. And if all goes well, we'll see, all right, got to verify my self-signed certificate. It's totally fine. We're going to load our restore point. As I walk through the tree, we'll find Megan B. And just like we did on the service provider side, I'm going to come to my inbox. I've got my emails. I've got my folder. I'm simply going to right-click and restore my entire folder. Same modern auth. Gotta authenticate again. We really want to make sure this user has access to both the restore points and now access to that particular mailbox. So I flipped back to my web browser. I'm going to do the same thing. We'll get our code. I have a new code. I'm just going to copy that quickly. You see me paste this here. I expect I'll get another verification prompt. Here we are. Which Megan B am I using? I'm currently signed in as 918. I'm going to continue that. Hopefully you aren't confused with the demo account scheme we're using here. And it's been successful. All right, so we're successfully authenticated here. Let's go look at our inbox for our user just to make sure we don't have any email in there. So it looks good. Looks all empty. Let's flip back to our tenant view, and we'll see that yes, we've confirmed here. We've authenticated, right? We've got our green check. So I'll hit restore, and we expect to see here the once our validation is successful. Here's our timeline. I think this should be pretty quick here, Tim, but while this is restoring, let's make sure we have in our minds, what do we expect to see? Since this is restoring these items live, we expect that we can flip back to the, our web browser view and see those messages there.
Right. So just from a summary perspective, right? You deleted everything that was in the inbox. You've come over to the VBO self-service interface and authenticated with the modern authentication. You've selected the Megan B inbox and basically said to restore the entire inbox. And we see that restore is now completed, that there were 69 items that were successfully restored, if you will. And my expectation would be, Tim, when you flick back over to OWA, where that inbox was previously empty, we would see all those emails that have now been restored that you had previously deleted. Yeah, exactly that, right?
Here we are, right?
No refresh, no log out, no nothing was required. They just showed back up and boom, there they are.
Yep, pretty impressive, pretty easy. When I think about what this means to the community, we being Veeam, needed to provide a mechanism for the self-service we just saw. We're leveraging Cloud Connect in order to access our service provider anywhere in the world over the internet. We have to have VBR for that. I think this is a solution that meets the needs today. I know there's some providers who have actually improved upon what we've delivered through this framework by providing their own web access to perform a restore like this for their tenants. So on the one hand, again, we've got this the Veeam service provider method. We've got the self-service tenant method, and then there's this kind of third set of options for our, generally speaking, mature providers who are doing things with custom consoles and their own development resources.
Right on. So Tim, in the interest of time, I think if we just kind of maybe, fast forward a little bit to a couple of things, and I think we can wrap, right? So we looked at the tenant perspective on what a restore would look like. We looked at it from the service provider perspective and what a restore would look like. I think it's a very common scenario that people delete email, whether it's a malicious act, whether it's unintentional and a mistake, and the need to be able to recover that, right? We've all been in those scenarios where an important executive or a member of the leadership team has lost or deleted an important email, and that becomes kind of a fire hazard, if you will, that we have to put out relatively quickly. The one thing that I would just probably say to the broader audience here is what we noticed throughout this process today is that there are multiple stages of this process where you have to go log in. And I want that to be kind of very clearly understood that as we're progressing in this modern era of vulnerability, right, and people that are out there that are trying to do malicious things, Microsoft has listened to that, and they've incorporated this level of modern authentication into their product that Veeam is essentially taking advantage of in their latest implementation of the 4C release for Veeam Backup for Office 365, right? So what we're doing is we're providing multiple gates, if you will, that users and administrators must step through and authenticate against to make sure that you no longer have to give people keys to the kingdom, right? That unrestricted administrator, I can do anything I want kind of access, but more granular now. Do I have access to be able to see the restore? Yes. Do I have access to be able to restore these particular items to this particular mailbox? Yes. And it's really an additional level of assurance to make sure that in Veeam's own way, that we're helping the Office 365 community continue to feel like their data is being respected and, basically protected, right, as we look at these particular solutions. So I think,
yeah, Tim, I got something to add there real quick. It popped into my head as you're talking about verifying that this data is secure and safe, stored at our service provider's prem. We talked about encryption of the actual data. We know there's multiple methods to encrypt either hard drives or volumes or the files themselves. That's all a piece of technology that service providers understand. But in this product as well, we've got a robust method to audit and log these activities. So for example, all the activities we walked through today would all be logged and able to be audited. Restore sessions, for example, can be pulled either directly through the GUI, through this log data, or through PowerShell and API interactions. And even just the simple step of opening a restore point and looking at the restore point, we're auditing that action. If you click into Megan B's inbox and you look at the email that the Microsoft Azure team sent to Megan B, if I double click, I can read that email. I mean, I am an administrator, so you would expect me to have that permission, but we're still going to audit that action. And so every time someone looks at an email or a file in OneDrive or a document from the SharePoint Explorer here, looking at these backups, whether it's the service provider or the tenant, all those actions are logged in a really granular format. So again, as you're speaking about building the confidence of the end user and protecting the data, it was an important thing I feel like to mention, that we've got this audit and logging capability.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for episode 3. As we're going to kind of wrap up this Backup for Office 365 series, I hope that the information has been informative and useful to you guys, the audience. Tim, as always, thanks a lot for your time and insight and experience. We have some additional things, again, that we're working on, the reference architecture for Veeam Backup for Office 365 and some other enablement content that we're going to be building that will be available for consumption here in the coming weeks and months. So Thanks a lot, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And guys, take care. Be safe.
Thanks.